All right, welcome back everybody. I hope you all had a great lunch, and I hope you had a chance to digest not just your food, but a little bit of the information you got this morning and have a few conversations around what you learned. This afternoon I think is going to be at least as interesting, if not more. We're going to shift gears just a little bit and move from, if you will, from the academic side, much more to the industry and commercialization side of things. As you can see, our next session is bringing AI to the bedside as a commercial venture, a new paradigm, question mark. So I've had a lot of discussions with my business colleagues about, well, what's the right sort of analog for bringing an AI system to market? Is it more like a medical device, more like a drug? How do we think about it? I think that's going to be some of the discussion in this panel. Really pleased to introduce to you the panel moderator, Suchi Saria. Suchi is really, I think, emblematic of the sort of bench-to-bedside transition that I think a lot of us in this room are interested in seeing. She came to Hopkins as an assistant professor, having done work in machine learning and healthcare. So she had a deep technical background, but this interest in building systems that could impact the world. During her last few years at Hopkins, among other things, she got very interested in sepsis, and she developed a system by the name of TrueScore, which is able to use EHR data and bedside monitor data to predict sepsis far before traditional methods were able to do so. But not only did she develop it, but she was also able to create a real system that was then first sandboxed here at Hopkins and ultimately deployed. And since then, she's gone on to found a new company, Bedside, which is dedicated to taking these sorts of innovations from the bench to the bedside. And so I think she's really got a deep perspective on this topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing this panel. So without further ado, let me introduce Suchi.
Thank you, Greg. I'm very, very thrilled to be here, and especially thrilled to introduce, I think, a very diverse and accomplished panel here. So I'll start with, I guess I just came in from a trip from Germany, where we had to say Professor Doctor, but Dr. Scott Levin. Scott is an associate professor of emergency medicine at Hopkins. He's also the co-founder and CTO of StoCastic, which is a Baltimore-based company that's building system engineering tools for making care systems more efficient and effective. And he has done some really nice work on taking electronic health record data and bringing it into operational workflows, like helping understand ways to improve efficiency, decrease length of stay, and such. Scott, would you like to join us in front so I can embarrass you for a few minutes while I introduce the other panelists? Next up is Dr. Leo Grady. Leo is the CEO of Paige.AI, based in New York City. Leo has 15 years of experience creating advanced medical imaging technologies. In particular, his prior company, where he was the VP of engineering, is HeartFlow, which launched one of the first cardiovascular products to non-invasively compute vivo coronary blood flow. And prior to that, he was at Siemens, where I learned he worked under one of our panelists, who I will introduce shortly. Leo is a fellow of the American Institute of Medical and Biomedical Engineering. He's published 2 books, several papers, hundreds of papers, and written numerous patents. Leo, would you like to join us on stage? Next up is Dr. Camille Vidal. She is the Director of Regulatory Affairs Strategy, Digital Health at GE Healthcare. And she works closely with the innovation teams there to develop and integrate AI functions into GE Healthcare products. She provides guidance on how to secure market authorization for new AI-based and digital health products, and has led interactions with the FDA for several recently released AI products in GE. Prior to this, she worked as a lead reviewer at the FDA for 6 years, where she led the pre-market technical review of 80+ products, ranging from radiological imaging systems to image analysis software and computer-aided decision support products. And then finally, Dr. Dorin Comaniciu. He is the Senior VP for AI and Digital Innovations at Siemens Healthcare. Dorin serves, he's been at Siemens, for, as I learned, for about 20 years. Over that period of time, he's worked on a variety of things all around. He's led a variety of products all around imaging, precision medicine. In particular, his team's work on compressed sensing won the 2014 challenge on sub-Nyquist reconstruction of the International Society for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine, allowing MR imaging up to 10 times faster without compromising image quality. The first application of this technology, compressed sensing cardiac C, enables diagnostic MRI of patients with arrhythmia, of those with, or those with respiratory problems. It received the 2017 R&D 100 award, and most recently his team contributed to the first patient positioning system powered by AI. A 3D camera captures the patient's shape, positioning, and height in 3D, providing correct isocenter position, right dose modulation, and consistent CT images. He's also the member of the National Academy of Medicine and a top innovator of Siemens. With that, will you please join us, Dorin? And Camille as well. So I think our plan was to start with 6 or so minutes of informal remarks. Some of you have slides and others of you may not. But I'll just, and those who are not presenting, please take a seat, and then we'll get started with an interactive Q&A afterwards. Would you prefer to sit here? Okay, that's awesome.
All right, well, thanks so much, Suchi, and it's great to be here. So I guess the charge of this panel was to talk more about commercialization, so I'm going to try to do that and be pretty brief and just tell you kind of, I guess, somewhat of a story of our company that actually started out of Johns Hopkins a few years ago. So everybody knows the challenge with healthcare. It's expensive, poorly experienced, very inefficient, and so what leaders must do in healthcare is try to balance cost with all these metrics of quality and patient safety and experience. And it's hard to do that because there's actually a lot of uncertainty around this stuff, and they only have a fixed number of resources to bring to bear to these challenges, and they're being told that they need to use data to do that, but I'm not sure, especially from some of the panels we heard earlier, I'm not sure they know exactly what to do. So as an engineer, I feel like it's our charge to really try to go from this transition to data, from data to actual outcomes, and overcome all the barriers that everybody's been talking about today. So we had done a number of studies and work at Johns Hopkins and ended up creating a platform based on a number of tools that we developed here. And there was also a number of tools that failed, and so we never brought out of here. And I always think it's important to mention that I definitely have learned, and our company I think has learned from these failures more than from the successes. But the important thing here is, I won't go into each of the solutions, but we're essentially taking EHR data, applying some sort of machine learning or AI or optimization algorithm, providing output that goes back to the EHR and then is used to drive a decision. In all the places, so as a kind of a commercial venture, our company has deployed all these tools at various hospitals, and are receiving revenue and things from these tools. But the important thing is they all have outcomes associated with them, and they're all outcomes that we can generally kind of clearly tie to cost. So it makes it easier, I think, for some of these hospitals, if they're your customer, to justify some of this when you can say a like hospital did this and these are the gains that they received. And so I'll go back to some of the solutions, but really what we've done out of Hopkins is to create this platform that's connected to the EHR, numerous different types of EHR. But it found that there was this article by Malone in 2005 that really did a huge systematic review of what makes a clinical decision support tool work or successful. What are the features of success? And as much as I wanted to disagree with this, it turns out that whenever I veered from the principles outlined in this article, the clinical decision support tool failed. So, so nowadays, you know, I'm kind of using this as a Bible for what we have to do to make a decision support tool successful. And you know, the other thing that I think, you know, some people in the other panel got into is that, you know, the thing that I think that is different about healthcare is its variability. It's human man-made variability, and as a result, you know, it becomes daunting to me to create a solution that I think can immediately scale to the entire world. So I don't really do that anymore. I don't, you know, do that, and I don't try to sell anything like that. What we're basically doing is have a platform that's able to ingest data at each local site and develop algorithms that deploy at those sites at scale and account for that variability. So I think it's really important when we're doing this work, or at least commercializing it, to come at this sweet spot where you adapt to variability and you understand that variability exists, but you're thinking about, okay, how can I scale even within that variable environment? So we've done a number of these tools. One, you know, it's interesting because I think as engineers, it's important to determine what problems you want to solve. The problems that our company tries to solve, I think, are not as hard, let's say, as some of the stuff you read in radiology, where they're building an algorithm and then they're comparing that directly to an expert, a radiologist in this area. We're focused on problems that are kind of fundamental issues with healthcare delivery that cost these systems tons of money. One is the no-show problem. So even at Johns Hopkins, 30% of patients don't show up for their appointments here. And if you ask how the institution is managing that, you don't get really an answer. And across the country, we've seen that, and there's particular environments that are serving even more vulnerable patients where this problem is 50%. So it's very hard to run a business where 50% of your expected demand isn't there. We have a tool running in the inpatient side. There's a lot of you know, kind of non-value-added time that a patient stays in a hospital towards the end, and it's because of lack of coordination. And so we have a tool that predicts discharge and tries to coordinate those resources and has seen improvements in length of stay. We have a clinical decision support tool that functions in the emergency department, focused on triage, and that's more clinical and looks at predicting different outcomes, and we've seen kind of gains in speed to different diagnoses and speed to the ICU. And this is another, I guess, point that I think is relevant, that there's a lot of, you know, can we get to a diagnosis faster? Can we build an algorithm that gets to a diagnosis faster? Well, if you have a patient waiting in a waiting room for 5 hours before any diagnostics even occur, it's going to be hard to drive that improvement. So there's a lot of to me, very system-level problems with healthcare that need to be addressed in order for some of these other tools, I think, to be successful. But then there's also a tool that we have working out in the community to support social workers and case management and community health workers determine what patients they should go in the field to see and what should they document. In this case, we're trying to prove that these community health workers, which are at this point subsidized by the government, are actually saving money for the healthcare systems, and so there needs to be a sustainable model where healthcare systems actually pay for them. And then we have a digital simulation support tool that's more of something that helps C-suite executives decide how they want to prioritize performance improvement activities. But each one of these tools is using EHR data, some kind of either simulation, optimization algorithm, and then is applying it back into practice. And you know, what we see, to be honest, is that, you know, in the majority of places we deploy these tools, it works. Some places it doesn't. So we're trying to study, well, in the places it doesn't, why doesn't? And I think that's one of the keys, is really focusing in on these failures and really getting at this kind of human interaction component, which is, like, frankly required for any of these AI tools to be successful. So, hand it over. Thank you. Hey everybody. Thanks so much for coming. So I'm going to spend a few minutes to talk to you about Paige. And the story really begins with pathology. I don't know how many people in the audience even know what pathology is. There's been a lot of discussion today about radiology and about other areas of medicine. Pathology is the branch of medicine that takes over when you've had a biopsy or a piece of tissue cut out, and that tissue needs to get examined for a final diagnosis. And oftentimes people talk about pathology as really the crux, the final Supreme Court of diagnostics, because at the end of the day, taking out a piece of tissue, being able to section it, stain it, look at it under a microscope, really provides you the most information about what's happening with that piece of tissue. But the world of pathology today is very analog, and the way it looks is you take the piece of tissue, you coat it in paraffin, you slice that, you mount them on slides, you stain those slides, look at those under a microscope, and then ultimately, after the diagnosis, those slides get stored away in one of these card catalogs forever. And the workload in pathology today at Memorial Sloan Kettering, in just 1 week, is represented by this stack of books. Each one of those books contains the slides for a patient, and those books are handed to the pathologist. They take them out, make their diagnosis, put them back in, and then they go in these card catalogs. The problem with pathology is really challenging, too, for pathologists. So to give you some sense of that, this is a needle biopsy core, and the focus of cancer in this case is very, very small, just 150 microns. After you zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, you find this one small focus of cancer. At least in prostate biopsy, 22% of these tumors are less than 1 millimeter. And if you think about that, in one prostate biopsy, you often take 14 cores, you make 3 slides per core, you can have 50 slides to go through, and you can't miss just one of these little foci of cancer. Otherwise, you miss the cancer for that patient. Something else to note about pathology from a digital standpoint for all of the computer people is that these slide images are enormous, 63,000 pixels by 28,000 pixels. So in a 20x magnification acquisition, each pixel is about half a micron in resolution. So we're dealing with enormous amounts of data, and that would just be for one slide out of a case where you might have 40 or 50 slides. One of the challenges with pathology is that this workload is increasing. This is a recent JAMA article showing the workload, a number of cases per week per pathologist over time. And it's been shown that when pathologists are overworked, in fact when they work more than 39 hours per week, they start making mistakes. And those mistakes can increase as that workload continues to increase. So what are we going to do about this? Well, these mistakes are catastrophic when they happen. I mean, we should make no mistake about it. These 2 women went public with their stories. One of them, Alison McCormick, she had her breast cancer missed on a slide, and it wasn't discovered until she was in stage 4, and it was completely impossible to do anything about it. This other woman, Sarah Boyle, had trouble breastfeeding her son, ended up with a biopsy. That biopsy, the pathologist said was cancerous, triple negative cancer. She ended up with chemo, a double mastectomy, and it was completely erroneous. So these errors in pathology are incredibly significant. And as these pathologists are becoming overworked, how do we prevent cases like this from happening in the future? So at Paige, we're trying to tackle this problem with AI. We're a spin out of Memorial Sloan Kettering. and we have worked with MSK to digitize all of their pathology slides, both new slides and archival slides. To date, over 1 million slides have been digitized across different cancer types. And with all of that data, we have the largest data repository of pathology slides that we're aware of, certainly in the published literature of what has been published in this space. 2 years ago, Google made national news, I think this was on the New York Times, they solved pathology with an algorithm that was trained on 500 slides, or trained on 250, tested on 250. Today at Paige, we're building AI on 100,000 prostate cancer slides, 100,000 breast cancer slides. And with that incredible data resource, we've created the first clinical grade AI in pathology. It's recently published in Nature Medicine, where we demonstrate near perfect diagnostic capability to detect prostate cancer, breast cancer, and basal cell carcinoma. And when I say near perfect, what I mean is AUC of 0.998, tested on patients from over 800 hospitals, 12,000 patients, 45 different countries. Using this technology, we're working toward regulatory clearance, and we did a small user study with 3 pathologists where they did their reads without the technology and then came back after 6 weeks, did their read with the technology. And what we found is that there was a 74% reduction in false negatives in missed cancers when they were using Paige compared to when they were not. Based on the strength of this user study and other of our published literature, the FDA granted us the first breakthrough designation for any AI, not only in pathology, but as far as we know, in oncology. So, going forward, pathology is really the bedrock of clinical diagnosis and treatment planning, particularly in cancer. And as pathologists are increasingly overworked, clinical errors are going to become more common, especially with biopsy volumes expected to grow and further increase while pathologist numbers are declining. It would be possible to do a second review of all the slides, but that's just not practical. Clinical grade AI in pathology offers us an opportunity to address this problem, and for the first time, we've demonstrated that the ability to produce clinical grade AI in pathology, leading to FDA breakthrough designation, publication in Nature Medicine. We're now moving forward to transform the discipline of pathology, working with pathologists to lead to a future where cancers aren't missed, where we can achieve together more accurate, more standardized, faster, lower cost pathology diagnosis and treatment planning. Thank you.
Good afternoon. 20 years ago, in cytology, we were on the verge of actually becoming fully automated. And cytologists were really worried that their work was going to be taken by automation. They were afraid that they were going to be replaced by the machine. And it's actually quite striking that today, 20 years later, with AI, we are having somewhat the same fear. I think it's coming to a rest now. At GE Healthcare, we have no intention to replace the physician, the radiologist. What we really hope to do with AI is to make our device easier to use and to change the user and the patient experience at the same time. So GE Healthcare is producing a variety of devices, from diagnostic imaging, MR, CT, X-ray, ultrasound, to actually also physiological monitors, anesthesia machines. So we range a whole span of different medical devices. And we're really looking at how AI can change how those devices are going to work, how the user is going to change the experience with those devices. When we look at the product that we currently have on the market, we ask ourselves, what is the improvement that we need to do to make the use of that device more effective, to improve the user experience around that device? It takes a lot of observation of how the device is being used, defining a true use case that you want to solve, and working closely with your clinical user to actually deliver that promise. Purposely today, I'm only going to speak of AI application that actually got cleared by the FDA that we have worked on at GFCare in the last few months or year. So we really targeted this question of how do you make the devices easier to use? And on this slide, you see 3 applications that are really geared towards that. The first one is for MR. When you do a scan of the head in MR, the technology has to set exactly the scanning parameter before it starts the scan. During that time, the patient is standing in the board, lying in the board, the head in the scan, potentially a bit afraid by all the sound around him or her. So that's an effective tool to just make it easier to use an MR system and make the experience more pleasant for the patient. Speed up the exam, get consistent exam, really something that can have positive impact on healthcare. And you can decline this principle across different modalities. In ultrasound, we have mechanism to make automatic measurements, so you save time to the operator, you get more precise measurements and more consistent measurements. In CT, it's marking the different vertebrae ahead of time for the user, so they don't have to spend the time actually marking those vertebrae. But maybe an example I want to dive a little bit more in detail into is the example of the chest X-ray and how they are prominent in healthcare. So when you actually step into a healthcare facility, most likely the first image that you will actually be subjected to is an X-ray, and frequently actually a chest X-ray. Yet they are not often prioritized within the workflow of a radiologist, and if you believe literature, it can take up to 8 hours for the radiologist to get to the chest X-ray. Well, if there was actually a finding that is critical in that X-ray, you would potentially wait 8 hours until you actually know it, which means that during those 8 hours, your patient could decline, or something could happen. Or maybe, in fact, you would have already treated the patient and maybe even send them home by the time the X-ray is read. So we worked on this problem and we asked ourselves, so how could AI help with that? And AI can help by being at the bedside and checking if there is a critical finding and alerting the radiologist so the radiologist can look at that image first or sooner in their workflow. So overall, right now, I would say that AI is used for the purpose of making it easier to use our devices, automating the annotation process, detecting, classifying findings. But as we go away from the single exam view and really look at the workflow, open up silos of data, you can really bring up the clinical context around the exam and really start building tool for clinical prognosis and prediction beyond the single encounter in one exam, but really look at the clinical workflow as a whole. Overall, at GE Healthcare, this AI revolution is touching every single device. So as a large organization, we had to come up with an effective way to actually build those AI algorithms. So we created the Edison platform. The Edison platform is essentially a platform on which you can create AI and deploy it seamlessly into our systems. So it can ingest data from different sources, breaking up the silos. It has up to the state-of-the-art tool for building AI algorithm. It has annotation tools so you can work in one single place to get all the work done. You can build those AI algorithms and seamlessly deploy them in the clinic. It's a platform that we currently use internally for the development of our algorithm and deployment of them. It's also a platform that we work on with third party, and it's a platform that we intend to open to all developers in the future that are interested in developing algorithm and AI function in the AI application to be brought to a clinic. There are challenges with bringing AI to the market. I listed a few here. I think from the technical challenges, I'd like to highlight the workflow integration. If the AI is not well integrated in the workflow, it's not going to be used. We heard that already today. And that's a big part of the technical challenge that sometimes is overlooked and needs to be figured out. From a business challenge perspective, the regulatory consideration, I'm a regulatory person, so obviously I'm interested. There are some challenges, obviously, dealing with the regulatory aspect of the industry. Good news is that AI and machine learning is not completely new. Mary-Hélène gave us a good example of early on product with AI that were actually cleared and approved by the FDA. Back in 1998, there was already the first approval for mammography, for a CAD for mammography, and for the cytology system that could actually do a first scan of the plates without human supervision. But there is a distinction between what has been approved or cleared up to today and what we hope all to envision. There is, up to now, all the algorithms that have been cleared are locked. What does that mean? That means that they are developed, trained, offline, and they are frozen or locked before being placed into the market. And so that goes probably, it's a bit paradoxal compared to what is the vision of AI. AI that learns on the go or on the fly, that will continue to evolve as you get more knowledge. It really goes against that. And so there is some work to be done to reconcile those two views. And in June of this year, FDA actually published a paper with a proposed framework for the regulation of modification of AI. They started to discuss how could we manage the reality of AI that needs to continue to evolve, and yet the need to have safe and effective algorithm. And for now, this mechanism is still under development, but there is hope that there will be the right balance, the right mechanism to allow the timely improvement of AI as we hoped it can be achieved, and at the same time maintain safety and effectiveness for the devices in which it participates. And I just wanted to conclude by saying that Mary-Hélène made it sound very easy actually to go through a process of commercialization, but it's not quite that easy. There is actually quite some work, and I think the first step to a successful commercialization is to have a clear and good use case, and also a good dose of perseverance. Thank you.
So, thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed immensely the presentations in the morning, and I learned quite a bit. So I was thinking that for this presentation, I will talk about the value creation by AI, when AI creates value, right? So now let's put some structuring in the thinking. So when we look at the AI system, we can look from the point of view of data generation and consumption. So we start from the scanners and instruments that are creating data and then move forward. At the scanner and instrument, AI brings quite a bit of automation, and I'll show examples later on. Then next level, it's about reading and reporting and guidance in the operating room, the first level of consumption of data. Next level is very interesting. It's the level where the data is being integrated around the patient for decision making, for planning, predicting, and prescribing. Here we have also a very interesting concept, the digital twin, where we talk not only about the statistical view of data, but also on the mechanistic view, how things are working. And the next level is at the value created at the institution level. So I'll show to you a couple of examples next. The first example is a camera that is being attached to the CT scanner. We introduced it at the RSNA 2 years ago, and this camera provides precise isocenter positioning and also checks on the orientation of the scan. And actually at this RSNA we'll see more features, more intelligent features added to the CT scanner. So this is an example where AI helps the scan to be made much faster and ultimately with much better precision, hence better image quality. Next, I'll show to you a very crowded slide. So these are a couple of examples of applications, starting from detection of bleeding and stroke from CT data, characterizing abnormalities from MR scans of the head, looking for various topics for the shoulder, such as the rotator cuff injury, analyzing abnormalities in X-ray. In the center, we have a very interesting application that for which we had FDA approval, has a couple of, it's called AI-RAD Companion, has a couple of algorithms connected to it. So essentially it's performing the lung, the detection of lung nodules, but also it looks at the incidentals such as emphysema, such as the detection of the measure of this of the heart, the coronary calcification in the heart, and so on and so forth. Next application is about coronary CTA, and then here in the lower corner we have segmentation and contouring for radiation therapy. Actually 71 organs and anatomies of risk that are being contoured for radiation therapy. Then we talk about detection lesions and characterizing lesions in prostate MR. And finally, there is also an example in the interventional room, such as the fusion of the ultrasound and X-ray data for valve interventions. Now, going to the next level, we are focusing in what we call AI pathway companions, and this relates to helping to manage the patient on disease, on specific diseases such as prostate cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, or coronary artery disease. So here we focus on mapping the patient data to the guidelines, and once the data is being accumulated, then we have networks such as the deep profiler that helps making decisions. Now, the question is that when AI creates value. So my message is that when AI is being applied to transactional activities, such as reading a radiology, where a radiologist is pressured to read, then it is very important for AI to operate at a very high AUC. If the AUC is not there, we see in that graph on the upper corner, it might be that AI introduces negative value. I would contend that the value of the AI is dropping very fast with the AUC, simply because one needs correction, simply because one needs more verification, and that involves more time. So that's for the transactional topics. On the other hand, there is this topic of making decisions from complex data. Here, perhaps there is a great opportunity for AI to create more value, because humans are not very consistent in making reproducible decisions from complex data. We're being influenced by everything that makes us humans in terms of what we read last night, how tired we are, and so on and so forth. So therefore here AI has a lot of opportunity, and we heard from speakers before. We also operate what we call deep profiler that integrates data coming from imaging, coming from pathology, coming from EMR, coming from wearable devices in order to help making various prediction and prescriptions. My last point, I would like also to give a bit of a vision, where are we going? So I'm going to describe a bit the digital twin. So this is actually a better version of me. So you see here my brain scan and my heart model is built from my MR data, and blood work and the knee model and electronic patient record. And one can imagine that at some point in the future we'll be able to integrate data from birth. And such data would follow us through life. And this data would be integrated into a lifelong personalized physiological model that is updated with each encounter that we have with the clinician, each measurement that we get from our smart devices. And then we have also some better neural networks that are today that are assessing how are we doing. And maybe then in the future we'll start talking more about health care and not disease care, right? To focus more like a personalized care through this digital twin. And of course, when disease happens, then we'll have the entire data integrated about us to make the right decision about the treatment. Thank you so much.
So we only have thank you for those presentations. We only have 25 minutes, so we're all going to have to speak fast. It's part of your mandate. So since the charge to all of us was to discuss kind of what is the commercialization, go-to-market, model for different forms of AI, maybe we'll focus a lot of our discussion on that. So I want to start off with a question to you, Camille, and to you, Dorin. Both of your companies have spearheaded and built AI-based products for a long time now. And historically, in order to advance these products, my understanding is a lot of it was packaged with devices. And so one question is, are you seeing within your companies, are these products migrating from being device plus software, where the AI, which was software, was sort of an add-on, to moving to software only? And part of the reason is, historically, my experience has been that because the reimbursement pathway for devices was so clear, there were many scenarios where even though the device was mostly futile, and it was primarily a software-based value add, it was easier to create a device than to try to take it into a market as software alone. So yeah, curious within your companies how that's changed. If you've seen change, if so how, and are there any software-based products only that you've taken to market?
So that works. I think we have a little bit of both. We continue to be a company that sells medical devices, and we sell them, and we continue to do that. And sometimes they include software function that maybe makes it a differentiator compared to the other product on the market. But we also make software more and more a product by itself. You can subscribe to a software service. You can subscribe to an extra function that will maybe enhance your device even more than what it was before.
Can you give some examples, Camille?
All right, some examples. So for instance, we have a software service that allows you to connect your, I think the your CT scanner to the cloud so that you can download on regular basis, upgrade for some functionality in the city. And so you would subscribe to that service so that you would get those upgrades on a regular basis. Don't have very specific here, but definitely, moving towards that new framework.
What about yourself, Dorin?
So I guess that today all major manufacturers, they have software platforms, right? So our platform, Singovia, from what I know, is seeing more than 1 million cases per week. So quite a bit of data is passing through it, right? Now, of course, when you ask the question how AI is being deployed, you can have multiple options. And to say that things are clear today, that would be too much of a statement, simple because there is so much evolution on the technology. How do you deploy AI? One can imagine to be deployed at a scanner or instrument, on an edge device, on a reading platform, or on the cloud. And the way the technology, privacy, and everything will evolve, that will also determine the penetration of various deployments modes.
Actually, can I respond? I think that's a really fascinating question to ask right out of the gate. And I'd like to say something controversial in response, which is that in a certain world, hardware is really providing the key value, and to some degree the software doesn't matter so much. And in another world, the software provides the key value, and it becomes interchangeable with the hardware. And I think, at least for certain kinds of medical devices, it's hard to do both, because if you really have a high-impact software, you have to not care which hardware is being used to generate the data, what scanner is being used. And if you have a high-impact medical hardware device, you want to be able to work with any software company. So I think one challenge, having been at a hardware company for a long time, is that you run a risk of commoditization when you have high-impact software that can work with any hardware device, because then whatever hardware you buy doesn't really matter, and you end up in this price war, which can drive the value of the hardware business down. So I do think there's a real tension here coming from a hardware company that's got both software and hardware components that we don't see as a pure software company.
So actually, the next question was going to be teed up for you. I think at HeartFlow, you guys decided to be pure software. Is that correct? Yeah. So was that a difficult decision to make, given that there were very few examples 9-10 years ago, or how long ago when HeartFlow was started? And what did that mean from a regulatory, like, were you finding yourself often having to like carve out a new path versus were there other precedents you could follow?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were a pure software. Well, we were providing a software computational version of an invasive catheterization where they, in order to decide for HeartFlow, you have to go inside the patient, give them a drug, measure blood pressure, loss across the blockage, and based on that pressure, either give the patient or not. At HeartFlow, an invasive version of that. We did a 3D this model and use and then calculate pressure loss across the stenosis. So we knew whether or not it was required for that patient without invasive catheterization. And looking back on that, I joined in 2012, and we were pioneering a lot. It wasn't just software as a computational diagnosis. It was a de novo 510K. We got a new CPT code. We got CMS reimbursement for pure software diagnostic test. But it was more than that. We were also a SaaS company, so we were pulling data out of hospitals, including Paige.AI. We had to comply with GDPR and HIPAA, of course, and we got high trust certification and SOC 2 and ISO 27000. So it was a real journey through that period, and there were a lot of lessons learned, I think, that are very relevant to Paige and many other software companies.
So Scott, I'd say the work you've been doing with StoCastic is sort of closer to what I would consider to be, very divorced from devices, very divorced from traditional single device-based data, and more kind of integrating different data sources for a variety of new reasons. Can you share with us, like, who's your typical buyer? How do you communicate value to them? How are they measuring value? And are you finding people having a hard time understanding the value? Or, like, in other words, in new markets, one of the big challenges, you go there and you have to, like, help them understand, like, why is this problem important? What is the value? And so are you finding yourself having to do that? And can you give examples of experiences from the field?
Yeah, I guess it's not too difficult because the problems that we're addressing are just like felt every day. So emergency department crowding, like you don't have to really convince decision makers within a hospital to try to do things to address that. You don't, the no-show problem in outpatient appointments, and even surgery, they're actually quantifying those losses. So I don't much have to explain the problem, that takes 1 second, they already know it. It's more that these problems are solvable and why, and then showing, and that's why for us it's, it's a different trajectory probably because the regulation is a lot lesser. And there is regulation, but we're able to get these products out very quickly and then show value and then refine them and then understand how to scale them kind of as we go. So it starts becoming, okay, this worked in one hospital, this worked in 2 hospitals, this worked in 3 hospitals. And once you start getting a critical mass, it becomes easier. And then the other thing is to not, when you're a company like ours, we don't have 1,000 employees, we don't have a huge regulatory burden, so we can, hopefully keep our prices reasonable, so that the ROI on a lot of these things are kind of like no-brainers. So that's been the strategy at least we had, and I think it's just the nature of it's the nature of the problems we're solving. But I do think the problems we're solving, although they're not the strict diagnosis, they're just underlying healthcare system deficiencies that I think actually affect all this other stuff that everyone's talking about.
Into the same question, Leo, can you share a little bit about Paige and sort of how are you, where are you in the commercialization pathway? Like, are you still early digitizing slides, or do you already have a product that you're taking to market? And if so, who are you selling to, and how do you describe your value prop? Like, who's your buyer?
So we're still in beta mode. We opened up what we call the Paige Early Access Program, and we have a number of hospitals both in the US, Europe, and Brazil that have a beta version of Paige and are doing clinical utility studies, gathering data, publishing that data, and presenting it so that we can really establish that value. It comes down to ultimately improved quality by not missing cancers, by doing automated real-time quality review of every case. And then longer term, also efficiency and productivity, enabling the pathologist to go through the case faster with more confidence, and lower costs as well.
Do you envision yourself going through the payer again, or are you selling direct to health systems?
Going through the payer?
Yeah, or versus going direct to health systems to sell it as, workflow productivity software.
Yeah, I think you asked about heart flow before. I have some scar tissue from going through the payers last time to generate new coding and new payment. And so the way that I look at it is that we're best off being able to deliver a product that delivers value in the current reimbursement structure without having to change that reimbursement structure, and at the same time pursue new coding and new reimbursement for additional services and technologies, because I just know that road is much longer. It's higher value to the doctors, it's higher value to the patients, it's higher value from a business standpoint, but it's much longer. So we need to be able to provide that value initially and quickly.
So just following up on that, like in the example that Scott gave, if there's a no-show, it's very easy to compute the value of a no-show, right? It's lost productivity, lost revenue, and so then you could imagine making a business case for it pretty simply. Are you finding the fact that you're saving on, corrected misdiagnosis or misdetections, is that something you're able to convince providers? I understand from a quality standpoint, it's super important. But from a value standpoint, sort of there's this question of like, well, okay, if our detection rates are slightly better, how do I experience that on a daily basis? Unless maybe, and I'm being very cynical and skeptical on purpose. So yeah, is that something you've had to think about?
Every day. So there was recently a paper published from UPMC on health economics of quality and pathology, where they calculated that the health system suffers a $21,000 loss for every error made in a pathology diagnosis on average. And so you can take calculations like that. It's different for breast versus prostate versus skin. But then you're in a game of figuring out, well, who does that value accrue to? Are they going to pay? Are they the decision maker for your technology? There are other ways of looking at value too. By today's CAP criteria, the College of American Pathology, you have to quality control a random sampling of 10% of your cases. But the pathologists don't get paid for that 10% of their cases. So if we can help them cut that down, avoid it, do 100% quality control, does that help them save time? Does that help their liability insurance? Does that help their payer? This is a big focus for us in the early access program, and why we're going through this pathway is to actually gather that data and get real world clinical information at various hospitals before really going out hard with a full product.
So I wanted to actually ask a question to the panel, including Suchi too. So being that we're in an academic institution, and all of us are doing stuff in medicine where publishing is kind of what I feel needs to happen, or to prove to at least clinicians that these tools are useful. What are your companies, and I've struggled with this some, because if you publish things and put them out into the world, you also could be losing a competitive advantage. So what has been your stances on publishing, or have you had strategies to do that, or just decided not to?
It is a mixture of both. So we encourage publishing, but at the same time, especially when it's about scanner technology or instrument technology, what is inside, many times, right, those are really restricted, including within our company. We have rules of engagement, and that's part of the business, right? So at the same time, if you look at our records, and so we're really encourage publishing, but again, everything is very specific.
In our case, I think publication, we think more of how the device is actually being used in clinical practice and what's the impact on the clinical practice and the patient outcome potentially. And so we typically work with clinical partners that are interested in doing those research, and we support them if we need to, so that they can go ahead and do the research and make it public.
I do think that some level of technical publication is important, because when you're asking a doctor or a patient to rely on a new medical device or new medical technology, it can't be magic. So there has to be some understanding of how it works. Do you need to provide all of the details in your secret sauce? No, not necessarily. But there has to be fundamental principles that are available and made public. To really emphasize what Camille said, I really think that coming from a technology background, I think the neglected side of publication is the clinical side, where you're doing clinical trials for either clearances or for different indications. And you're doing clinical utility studies to say what happens when you take this technology, you put it into practice, and you use it on a certain patient population with pre-specified endpoints. And to enable that sort of publication really allows you to lead with evidence, it allows you to justify pricing, and it allows you to communicate value to hospitals that are sometimes taking a risk on joining up with a company that has a new technology and a new way of doing things.
You mentioned the FDA program on continuous learning, and you've also been at the FDA before. Do you see barriers? I mean, as someone on the technical side, I see tons of barriers to giving sort of blanket provision on, right now the way they're approaching it is kind of, I see tons of open questions there in the field that I think we're still figuring out how do you measure robustness as different data sets change, et cetera. So is that something GE is actively working on? It sounds like you're spearheading the process there. Can you help us understand, where do we stand in terms of a maturity and likelihood that it's going to move forward in the very, very near term? Obviously, I know you're not at the FDA, so we have to take your point of view with that in mind.
Yeah, you might want to ask other people in the audience, but first thing, this is a position paper, right? So it's not a change of regulation. It is just, I would say, mental exercise of how you could go forward with regulating AI that evolves or adapts. The approach is really to kind of pre-specify what changes you want to make ahead of time, and pre-specify your passing criteria for those situations you can envision. It's actually, it probably could offer you some room of flexibility around modifying your AI algorithm to some other close near neighbors use case. It could allow you a little bit of flexibility in maybe optimizing your AI algorithm to slightly different situation. But I don't think we are yet in a scenario where you're going to have an AI that starts in one specific use case and changing completely to something different without going back to FDA. I think we have to be realistic about what that really is going to be.
So we have 5 minutes left to the panel ending. We'll take a couple of audience questions. I'll ask one question in the meantime, and if anyone's interested, there are mics on the sides if you'd like to line up. Question, what are some barriers you foresee in taking, this is open to anybody who wants to respond. I'm curious, what are some big barriers you see that are coming up in the work that you're doing in commercialization and go-to-market? Just like a quick one-line answer, if that's possible.
Well, to me, the big barrier is all the hype around it. So the snake oil and the hype makes it hard, and so that to me is a big barrier.
For us, the challenge in commercialization, I think, is still to show credibility Like, are people really trusting the AI that we produce? Do they really think it works? And I think it's only after you really get into it and show them that you can make an AI that works that they will eventually adopt it.
I think there are a lot of barriers. For us at least, the technical barriers are really not what we struggle with. From the standpoint of AI, I think one of our biggest challenges, and Dorin and I were just talking about this morning, is the way in which we talk about it, the way in which we frame the technology, and the perception of value associated with it. Is it a nice to have? Is this post-processing? Or is this an essential tool that allows you to avoid doing other things that you might otherwise have to do? And I feel like we really need to be able to shift the conversation and the conception around AI away from a little doodad that's fun to have that you impress your friends with to something that's a core central clinical tool that is allowing you to do things that you couldn't previously do.
And I would add, as one of the main challenges is in the difficulty of establishing the ground truth. We see quite a bit of variability in the ground truth from institution to institution, and ultimately if you want to build systems that are performing with very, very high AUC, that variability in the ground truth derives into high variability of the AUC.
Hi. So this question is, I guess, particularly directed at Leo, but everyone in general. So Paige was rather famous or infamous for issues of the ethics behind how the data was collected to develop your AI. I'm wondering if anyone has thoughts about the ethics of data collection. I mean, how is data consented? It seemed with Paige that the data was not properly consented, and there was a lot of pathologists at MSKCC who were extremely upset about what was going on with Paige, and there was a bit of a, should we say, a change in leadership at MSKCC as a result of this. I'd be quite interested in your thoughts about what's happened since then.
Leo, can we take a second question as well, and so this way the panel can manage its time?
Okay. Yes. My question is, you all are a large company or small, but basically starting to create a product which eventually you want to sell to help healthcare, so you have to go through FDA. Now, out there also are these groups that we heard about today where they're developing it in-house, they're using it in-house, maybe they might give it to their colleague at their neighboring hospital. Are they going to go through FDA? How, as experts in the field, since you've taken you have or will take things through FDA, what about when things are not a commercial venture but in-house? How are we going to protect the patient? I think someone said 90% this morning won't even go that route commercially. So you guys are the experts in taking through FDA. How do we handle that?
Okay, well, I think I need to answer the question about Paige first and MSKCC. So for all of you who don't read the New York Times every day last November, what happened was that one of the leadership within MSK was found to be publishing papers and not disclosing all of his industry ties when he published those papers. And there was an article in ProPublica and then followed later in the New York Times about this. And he ended up exiting MSK. After that, the New York Times wrote a string of other articles along the same theme, which was that MSK had lost its way, that it was too beholden to industry, that it was somehow had gotten dirty and corrupt in a way. And one of those articles was about Paige. It was before I joined. And what they said was basically, this is an incredible data deal that Paige has. There are board members of MSK who are investors and founders of Paige, and isn't this shady? And so, as a result, MSK did a very deep investigation, checked all the conflict of interest. At the end of the day, nothing was found to have been done unethically, nothing was found to have been done illegally, and the New York Times went on to write other articles about MSK and other institutions. So there is a second part of the question there, which was, what about patient consent? What about patient privacy? And I think that there's certainly a societal need and importance around the privacy and confidentiality of healthcare data. I think we've all seen the ravages of Silicon Valley around privacy and how that topic has really been run roughshod over. At the same time, there's a real societal need to be able to build new technologies that can provide better care for all of us, and to leverage what's been learned about healthcare and treatment of patients in order to build these new technologies and offer new services. And I think that we need to find a way as a society to be able to marry these two these two countervailing trends. And one way to do that is through the use of anonymization and the aggregation of data, of anonymized data or de-identified data, in order to build new AI technologies. Some people argue that it's impossible to fully anonymize data. Some people say you still need to consent, have patient consent even if the data is anonymous. And then others say, well, how do you have an 83-year-old patient on life support consent to use of their data for a deep learning algorithm for this or that? And so these are very tricky questions. I do think that we have a real need to preserve patient privacy and confidentiality. We also have a need to push the healthcare and medical technology forward in a way that effectively allows us to deliver better care at lower cost.
Do you want to take the second question, Camille? And also, we're a few minutes over, so very, very briefly. Thank you.
Yeah, so, Marilyn, your question is interesting. FDA does not regulate the practice of medicine, but regulates manufacture of medical devices. And so you fall in this interesting situation where if it's the institution that is developing their own AI algorithm, they may not actually fall under the jurisdiction of the FDA. While if we develop an AI algorithm and commercialize it, we fall under the FDA's jurisdiction. How is that difference going to be handled? How are we going to guarantee that AI algorithms that are produced within a manufacturer organization or within a clinical organization are of equal quality? I would say I don't know. There may be standard of good machine learning practices that hopefully will come into place and that people will want to adhere voluntarily to and make sure they follow those good processes. Today, I think, I'm not quite sure they are fully in place yet. I mean, obviously, we all follow the best practices that we know of, but it's not that there is a set of practices written somewhere. There are definitely some move towards ethics and creating good AI, and probably it's going to be to adopting this type of approach that institution will want to do the right thing.
With that, let's give a loud round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much.